Welcome back for another 10 Talk, and guess who's back? Miss Emily Price is here with us today as we tackle this theme about what happens when kids become teenagers. They start to run off and lose their faith, right? And so, well, that seems to be a general trend, but that's probably why you clicked on this link, right? That title of My Kids Are Pagans, it might have brought you in. So
and that tends to be a very painful experience for parents.
Exactly. And so that's why we want to talk to you a little bit, open it up. And, you know, we work with kids all the time, and certainly we have to help them and convince them and motivate them in the faith, but at the same time, leaving it open to their own option, because that is something we'll talk about that is very important for them. So maybe you feel like this is your situation, or you know someone who is going through this and you want to help them. You want to help them to grow in the world that we're living in and understand that God is someone important in their lives. You may think back to the times when your children were those little angels that were just so sweet and innocent, and they just listened to every word and hung upon every prayer. And then as soon as they kind of enter into that adolescent stage, they start to stray from that path and run away from those moments. So now you're probably referring to teens or preteens, and they question everything. They question everything about God. They question everything about the faith, and you don't always have the answers, right? And if you're a parent of younger children, don't worry. You'll get your chance to experience this later on.
It's coming. It's coming.
As time passes, kids grow up, and we've all been through that stage in life ourselves. It happens at different moments for each one of us, but most often it happens in a moment where they start to question the existence of God, right? In our world today, the culture makes it very difficult on them, and it makes them ask these questions younger and younger. And so your question, I'm sure, is, what do I do, Father? What am I supposed to do with this situation in my home? Well, you can do a lot and you can do nothing. Let me explain.
Surprise!
You can't do anything because the decision to believe in God and to spend time with Him is completely of your children, right? It has to be made by them. And so it's a personal decision. And we all understand that. We understand that we can't force someone to do it, but at the same time, we don't want them to stray from God too far. And sure, we can have it totally clear in our minds and know that it's the best thing for them if they follow this path, that they're going to be on the right path leading towards God and that they're going to be blessed. But we also can't force that upon them. And so we have to help them to discover that this is what God wants for them, that this is the path that He wants for them. But that important word, discover, it depends on them. They have to discover it. And along the way, we have to be the ones that point out the path. And that's what your role as parents and our role as mentors for your children is in our lives, right? We are trying to help them to move on that path of holiness, move towards God.
Yeah, and that's actually what you want for your children. You want them to be able to make decisions on their own. You want them to be able to think for themselves, to think critically, and to think well about the world. And unfortunately, what that means is that they have to question the things that they've been told. And a lot of the things they've been told that they believe have come from you. So this is just a very natural phase that you actually want your child to go through. You want them to think about what they believe so that it means more.
Exactly. And so that's what you can't do, right? You can't force them, because otherwise it isn't something that they choose to do and they follow in. And it's a point that should be taken very seriously, because it can be a moment where if forced too much, we all have that little bit of stubbornness in us, that it turns into something that is an obstacle that is hard to overcome. Maybe the faith becomes an obstacle to them, because anything that has God, or has to do with God, it becomes something that they don't want anything to do with.
Yeah, and one thing that I thought about in listening and reading Father's notes on this talk was how fear, it was told to me once that fear is never a good counselor, that making decisions out of a place of fear is not necessarily within God's will for you, that the Spirit of God is not found in a spirit of fear. And yeah, you can tell, or at least I think, you can tell that when you make a decision out of fear, say for your child, that, I don't know, it's
there's
got
confusion.
like
There's like this there's a resistance to it, right? There's
Yeah.
something that isn't clear and isn't going to give you that fulfillment of making that right decision.
It's stressful. It's
Fear-
stressful on both sides. You know, it's
fear is
stressful for the
unknown.
child and
Exactly.
stressful for you. And to strive to make a decision out of confidence in the Lord's will and confidence in his protection and his guidance.
That said, that doesn't mean there's nothing that you can do. There are some steps that I think you can do, and it's especially as a prayerful person leading them towards God, not by forcing, but by modeling it for them, right? And we've talked about modeling before and how important it is as a parent to model these things. And so the first tip that I would give you as a parent counseling your teenage son or daughter to be close to God is to recognize that God is their friend, right? Sometimes they can be doing all these prayers and devotions and they say, God, Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and that doesn't mean anything to them. But as you come closer into that relationship with God and you recognize him as a friend, as the merciful Father that loves you, that wants to embrace you and come close to you, then you start to like this guy, right? You like God a little bit more, and you encourage them to have this relationship with him because he is going to be the friend in those times of need. And he's one that will be a lifeline when they're in moments of crisis. He's one that will be there in their most difficult moments of their life. How many times have we, in difficult moments, gone to prayer when things are difficult, right? We turn back to God even when we didn't feel like we were even close to God. That's what happens. God will constantly call us back to himself. He is the good shepherd who's in search of the lost sheep. And precisely because we're lost, that's why he's going after us, right? The second tip that I have for you is to see God as the answer to every question, right? So help them to see that God has the answers, that he created the whole world and that he understands the way that things work and how the things are going to come to pass in the world. And if we bring our questions to him and we go to him with all desire to understand the truth, we are going to find those answers. It can be found in God. He is the creator of all these things. He made us. He made all the complexity of each one of us. And so even when we don't understand ourselves, and how many times as teenagers did we not understand why I think the way that I think, right? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Or why did they do that? Or why am I doing this? Or why do I think in this way? Well, God knows the answer, and he understands our confusion, right?
Yep.
And so he can bring us back into his fold and really put us on the right path. So that's something we have to teach them. He has every possible outcome. He has already thought of it, right? So allow them to know that God has all the answers.
Just a quick thing. I remember reading in a book once, written by a psychologist, who said that every teenage girl thinks she's crazy. It's no secret. Every teenage girl at some point in their life is going to think they're crazy.
That's great. And so third tip that I have for you is to teach them that God is patient. And maybe you don't even need to teach them that, but you need to remind them over and over again that God will wait for them. God will wait for them to be ready. God will wait for their time. It's going to be a personal experience of God. It's going to be a moment when maybe they least expect it. But God is used to people rebelling, right? And God is used to people running away from him and having to go find them and then bring them back. That is what happens over and over again. The Israelites, they ran away from God. They went into the desert because they weren't worthy to be in the presence of God, and they wanted to run away. They wanted, wherever God was, they wanted to be elsewhere, right? And that's kind of what happens with a teenager. That's what happens in our own life, I'm sure, many times. Sometimes it's just being a little bit ignorant of what God wants for us allows us at least to think, well, at least I don't have to do it because I don't know about it, right? And yet we know about it, right? We know about it, and we know that God is calling us to a higher mission, to be better, but we know that that means work. And what does a teenager like less, or the least in the world? It's work, right?
Well, maybe that or dishes. I'm not sure.
Right. Anything that has to do with making themselves have to go do something, fulfill something, right?
Yeah.
So, sorry, teenagers, but that's just the way things are, right? And we've all gone through it. But don't worry, God will wait. God will wait for the right moment for your son or daughter. And at the same time, we're asking them to be patient. We have to be patient with them, right? We have to be patient and allow them to have their moment, because God's going to do it when he wants to do it, not when we as mentors or you as parents decide that it's the right moment. this is the experience that I think is maybe very natural to all of us, and we've all had that experience of God calling us back to himself. So let's be patient with them, allow them to go through those stubborn moments, through those rebellion moments, and come back to him when they're ready. So that's where your role and my role come in, right? Luckily, God is in charge because otherwise it would be a disaster. Things would go as we planned, but maybe not as we desire. So he's in charge, and we simply have to follow his lead. In most cases, in my experience, there will come a point when you as a parent have to be less immediately the primary influence on your child and let people on the outside enter in.
Mm-hmm. So, and that's actually a normal part of childhood development. In this book that Father suggested I read called Untangled, specifically it had to do with the development of girls through the stages into womanhood, but I think this particular principle applies to both girls and boys. They are on their way to becoming adults, right? And they associate, unfortunately, parents with childishness. And so that's where that pushback comes from, is that attempt to become independent and like an adult. What they don't realize is that they still need you.
And so this is where your role comes in, especially from even before they become teenagers, but into after. You have to find allies for them. You have to find people who can be mentors, who can help them along this path. And friends and family members and people who are around your children, and you kind of choose who's there for a while, right? And then when they become a little bit older, they start to choose their own friends. And hopefully they continue with the same friend group that you help them to get into. But it's important to find those people for them, because oftentimes they're not as good at finding them as we are, right?
Yeah.
So when they're getting older, the moment might come as well when you simply need to let another adult help to form your child, right? They no longer listen to mom and dad, even though you're telling the truth. But as soon as another adult, another young person who's a little bit older than them says exactly the same thing that you're saying, it rings true in their ears, right? Mm-hmm. They love to hear the truth, but they just don't love to hear it from mom and dad.
So on this point, a neat idea that we had was, why not adopt a young person from your church that you know is solid and striving to live their faith as a faithful Catholic or Christian, and adopt a priest or a nun, have them over for supper at your place. Not only will that benefit them because they'll get to be surrounded by community, but it'll benefit your family because they'll grow up with this normalcy of having holy people. Not that your family isn't holy, but you just, priests, they come with an extra little added oomph.
Somebody around them. Yeah. And the final suggestion that I have for you is to pray for your teens, right? This is a journey that is preparing them for life. And God is in control again, but we need to ask for those special graces to come upon them, help them along the journey, remove those obstacles, and be faithful instruments. Sometimes we're going to be road signs. Sometimes we're going to be a speed bump, right? Sometimes we're going to be a loving gaze or a warm embrace, or maybe a firm reminder, right? But we have to consult God in all of this and not just decide for ourselves what instrument God wants to use in those moments, but rather what we want to use in those moments, but what God wants to use in those moments, so that we're not just acting on our own self-impulse. We have been entrusted with these beautiful souls and these beautiful lives, and we have to cultivate them in order to launch them on their journey. So let us not forget this aspect of raising kids. Praying for them is so important. And all this is to say that, we have to pray that they will catch those cues along the way, that they'll hear the voice of God in the right moment and make the right decisions as they move along in life, to be in sync with his indications and directions. At the end of the day, the best way that you can prepare your kids for an amazing life is, again, to model it for them, to model your relationship with God, to pray often, to be on your knees and to make the decisions that are aligned with your faith and your principles in life. And these are truly going to be something that passes on to your children. They're going to imitate you. Whether they recognize it or not, they're going to imitate you subconsciously. They're going to make the same decisions. How many of us, years later, we would always promise we're never going to be like our mom or dad, and then all of a sudden it just comes out, right? That's what I'm talking about. Hopefully, it's a virtuous thing that we start to do, right? That we start to act as our parents because they have been an influence on our lives.
Mm-hmm. If you're looking for more resources, if you're looking for kind of psychological books about the psychological development of your children, we have a couple favorites. Untangled being one for girls, as well as Queen Bees and Wannabes. And then there's one for guys.
There's Masterminds and Wingmen. And there's also one by the Renier family that we've really enjoyed. It's called Brick by Brick. So we'll put all these links in the description at the bottom of this video. And
there's a couple things in the psychology book that don't exactly align with Catholic teaching, but on the whole, the book in general is very, very good.
It's always good to read the psychological books with a little bit of grain of salt and know that, okay, there's certain things that they're going to go off, but generally the ones we have mentioned are very aligned to a good anthropology, a good human formation. But definitely you have to read them with your Catholic cap on to make sure that you got the clarity in the teaching of the church. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope this is helpful to you, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next 10 Talk.
Oh,
God bless.